Constant waves, remember that.
El Nino, and how does it happen? Firstly, we need to know what's normally happening in the tropical Pacific.
Okay, what is this over here? South America, okay. So South America, the equator's roughly right here. And over here we have Australia and Papua New Guinea and a bunch of other Southeast Asian islands, okay? So we're located in the South Pacific here is what we're talking about. Now, we're going to mostly focus on what goes on here, but there are global implications for El Nino and La Nina. And for those of you at home and the people here, if I ever do a very poor job of explaining something and you need more to go off of, I've posted all of the videos that are listed in AP Classroom. They've come up with like teacher videos, and they have basic content and animations that go along with it, and sometimes they have questions that go along with each section. So if you ever need an assistance, and maybe you people at home, it would probably help out if you went through and looked at those. I think there's 3 videos on El Nino, La Nina, and just like a recap and a couple practice questions. So those are available for you to help with your learning if you don't feel like you're getting everything.
This vast stretch of ocean sees consistent winds called trade winds that blow from east to west. These winds push warm water near the surface in their direction of travel, so the warm water piles up on the western side of the ocean around Asia and Australasia. On the other side of the ocean, around South and Central America, as the warmer water gets pushed away from the coast, it's replaced by cold water which is pulled up from deeper down in the ocean, a process called upwelling. Okay,
one, you need to know that process, upwelling, where cooler water gets pulled up from down under, so to speak. Now, typically we think of cooler water, which way would it go? Down. And probably there is some mixing and turnover as that cool water comes up, and then as it cools, and it probably mixes a little bit. Normally we think of there's more biodiversity and more productivity on land when you have the more water and the higher the temperatures, right? So like tropical rainforests are most diverse ecosystems. But in the water, what are the 2 main things you want in order for high productivity? Oxygen, which is you find in what kind of water? Colder the water, the more oxygen it holds. And what else does cold water provide? Because of this upwelling and movement of water around, it helps to bring more what to the surface? Nutrients. So you have more nutrients, you have more oxygen, you're going to have more productivity all the way through the food chain, and you're going to have a lot better, if you're off the coast of Peru and Ecuador over here, off of the western coast of South America, you're going to have much greater productivity of fish. This is where like a large amount of the anchovies of the world are caught. A lot of other fish are caught there. Just hear a lot about anchovies for some reason. And so that cool water increases productivity. Now, over here where we have the warmer winds and water that get pushed over toward Australia and New Guinea, that warmer winds and water and tropical moisture create a lot of what? Good, a lot of rainfall. And so that rainfall is going to benefit Australia and New Guinea in what way? More rain, the more vegetation, the more crops you can grow. A lot of crops that are grown in Australia are grown off of this northwestern coast over here in Queensland. I went there a few years ago, and a lot of places from like the coast to the mountains, which are probably 10, 15 miles apart, about as far as you can see in a lot of places where they've cleared off, 95% of the crops are sugarcane, and so you'll just see sugarcane everywhere. They do plant a few others, like some coffee and a couple other things, but mostly sugarcane in that region. Like I said, it's everywhere. And so the more moisture they get, the better crops they can grow, the less drought-like conditions take place. What else? We'll stop there. So more moisture over here, the better for crops. Cooler over here, the better for fishing and fishermen.
This creates a temperature difference across the tropical Pacific, with warmer water piled up in the west and cooler water in the east. Warmer water adds extra heat to the air, which causes the air to rise with more vigour, and it's this rising air that creates an area of more unsettled weather, with more cloud and rainfall. That rising air in the west sets up atmospheric circulation across this part of the world, with warm, moist air rising on one side of the ocean and cooler, drier air descending on the other. This circulation reinforces the easterly winds, so this part of the world sits in a self-perpetuating state until El Nino begins.
Okay, that whole first part, that's the normal or neutral phase. Okay, so what happens when El Nino occurs? The Southern Oscillation, it's called an oscillation because it happens every 3 to 5 years. It talks about that in your book a little bit. And so this is out of whack with what kind of the normal or neutral or in-between phase.
Conditions are right, tropical Pacific weather systems, or slow changes in the ocean around the equator, can set off a chain of events which weaken or even reverse the usual trade winds. With weakened trade winds, there's less push of warm surface water to the western side of the ocean and less upwelling of cold water on the eastern side. This allows the usually colder parts of the ocean to warm, cancelling out the normal temperature difference. Because the area of warmest water moves, so does the associated wet and unsettled weather. This changes rainfall patterns over the equatorial Pacific, as well as the large-scale wind patterns. It's this change in winds which has a knock-on effect, changing temperature and rainfall in locations around the world. The main impacts are around the tropics, where you see an increase in the risk of floods in Peru and droughts in Indonesia, India and parts of Brazil. The main impacts are around the tropics and rainfall.
Stop. Okay. So, El Nino. It gets warmer. That warm water in air gets pushed back toward the east. The east. And because it's warmer over here in South America, how does that negatively impact them? Less fish, less productivity over there. If you're a fisherman, that's an issue. There's going to be less rainfall over there on the Australian side, which causes what? Okay, causes drought, which could cause what? Less productivity in crops, and also could cause what else? What happened in Australia earlier this year, last year? Wildfires. So extensive droughts, a bad El Nino could result in wildfires happening. So that's another issue over there. And so they talked about droughts in other locations in southern India and Indonesia and places throughout the South Pacific. And then over here, you're going to have more rainfall over on the South American side, and which already gets a pretty good bit of rain in the Amazon. So more rainfall. You've got the Andes Mountains over there that's pretty close to the coast. So heavy rainfall there could cause what? Flooding, erosion, landslides. These are all things that happen. I spent some time in Ecuador and Costa Rica, and it's really, they're mountainous. They're, when they get waterlogged during the rainy season, the more water they have a ton of landslides. You'll go around, there'll be roadblocks everywhere because just like they cut these roads out right in the side of a mountain, and when there's just a lot of water and soggy vegetation, like it will just slide down the mountain. It causes problems for people that live there. So those are issues associated with El Nino. Okay.
Locations around the world. The main impacts are around the tropics, where you see an increase in the risk of floods in Peru and droughts in Indonesia, India and parts of Brazil. But virtually wherever you are in the world, El Nino has the potential to affect you directly via the weather or indirectly via socio-economic impacts. There's another impact from El Nino which happens because of all the extra heat at the surface of the tropical Pacific. This releases vast amounts of energy into the atmosphere which can temporarily push up global temperatures. This is why El Nino years often feature among the warmest on record. Each El Nino event is different, so the global impacts can change. You can find out more.
The global impacts are less consistent than the impacts on the South Pacific. For instance, one of the things that College Board said in one of their videos was that El Nino years typically suppress Atlantic hurricanes. So and you would assume the opposite would happen with La Nina, where you have an increase in Atlantic hurricanes. So it really depends. And also in the U.S., it has an impact on our weather patterns, but it's not quite as consistent. Usually in your book here it says El Nino includes cooler and wetter conditions in the southeastern United States where we live. So El Nino can have that impact on us, cooler and wetter conditions here. So it's really kind of a cascade of events going on throughout the world. But the main thing you need to be familiar with is what's happening there in the South Pacific.
About the differing impacts of El Nino on our website. El Nino peaks around Christmas time and lasts for several months. It can dive back to neutral conditions, but sometimes reverses into La Nina. This is the flip side of the oscillation, which sees a strengthening of the normal trade winds. This pushes the warmest water to the far western part of the tropical Pacific and increases the upwelling of cold water in the east. This cooler water extends out from the coast of the Americas towards the central part of the ocean. La Nina also impacts global weather.
So what would you think La Nina would do off the coast of South America? Cooler, maybe increase productivity somewhat. That warmer tropical water gets pushed over farther toward Australia and Southeast Asia. What do you think that would do to overall rain production? Probably increase. And so you really kind of see an opposite effect of what's going on with El Nino. Okay. Really, La Nina is kind of just an increase in that neutral phase, what they call the neutral phase. Okay. All right. Let's look here. Anything else? Anything else? We talked about upwellings. It happens every 3 to 7 years. This fluctuation in El Nino. Talked about the impact on fishing off the coast of South America, droughts and crops and wildfires in Australia. El Nino can result in floods and landslides in the South American tropics. So those are all important characteristics we talked about for us. It can mean cooler and wetter conditions in the southeast United States. And I think that's the majority of what you should be familiar with. Okay? All right, any questions?